The morning sun cast long shadows across the bombed-out streets of Warsaw as Maria Kowalski adjusted the worn leather strap of her messenger bag. At 24, she had already lived through more terror than most people experienced in a lifetime. The year was 1943, and the Nazi occupation had transformed her beloved city into a nightmare of checkpoints, raids, and disappearances. Maria told her the arrival of the sabotage team came disguised as a routine medical supply delivery. 3 resistance operatives posed as equipment technicians responsible for maintaining the facility's laboratory instruments. Their leader, introduced as Engineer Weber, possessed the technical knowledge necessary to disable the chemical weapons production system. Maria coordinated with the team through carefully staged encounters in corridors and supply rooms. Each conversation appeared routine to outside observers, but conveyed critical information about facility layout, security procedures, and target locations. The operatives brought specialized equipment hidden in their tool cases, explosives designed to look like standard electronic components. Engineer Weber explained that the sabotage would target the facility's chemical synthesis laboratory located 3 levels underground. Destroying this equipment would set back the weapons program by months while appearing to be an industrial accident rather than deliberate sabotage. The explosion had to be precisely timed to avoid casualties among medical staff while ensuring complete destruction of the target. The plan required Maria to provide access to restricted areas during a shift change when security patrols were transitional. She would guide the team through maintenance corridors to the laboratory level, bypassing electronic surveillance systems and checkpoint guards. The entire operation had to be completed within a 30-minute window. Preparation for the mission involved memorizing detailed building schematics and practicing movement sequences that would minimize detection risks. Maria studied ventilation system layouts, electrical panel locations, and emergency exit routes that could serve as escape paths if the operation was discovered. The sabotage team worked to modify their explosive charges for maximum effectiveness against the specific laboratory equipment. Chemical synthesis required precise environmental controls and specialized glassware that could be easily damaged. Relatively small explosions in the right locations would create catastrophic failure throughout the system. 3 days before the planned operation, unexpected developments threatened the entire mission. German intelligence officers announced the discovery of resistance activity within the facility. The investigation that began with Dr. Fischer's death had uncovered evidence of security breaches and possible espionage. Oberfeldarzt Klein called an emergency meeting of all medical staff, announcing new security procedures that would be implemented immediately. All personnel would undergo additional background checks, restricted areas would have enhanced surveillance, and new identification protocols would be required for access to sensitive locations. Maria listened to these announcements with growing dread, understanding that the increased security measures would make the sabotage operation nearly impossible. The 30-minute window of opportunity had effectively been eliminated by round-the-clock surveillance and additional guards at critical checkpoints. Engineer Weber requested an emergency communication session to discuss adjusting the mission parameters. They met in the facility's laundry room during a shift change, using the noise of washing machines to mask their conversation from potential listening devices. "The original plan is no longer viable," Weber said quietly while folding medical linens. "We need a different approach that accounts for the enhanced security measures." Maria had been considering alternative strategies since hearing Klein's announcement. The increased surveillance made stealth operations impossible, but it might also create opportunities for more direct action during moments of confusion or emergency. "What if we create our own emergency situation?" she suggested. "Something that would require evacuation of the laboratory level while providing cover for the sabotage operation." Weber considered this possibility, recognizing both its potential and its dangers. Creating an emergency situation would provide the distraction needed for the mission, but it would also increase the risk of casualties and ensure immediate investigation of the incident. They developed a modified plan that relied on Maria's position in the medical staff to create a credible emergency scenario. She would trigger the facility's chemical contamination alarm system, claiming to have discovered a toxic gas leak in the laboratory level. This would require immediate evacuation while emergency response teams assessed the situation. During the confusion of evacuation and response, the sabotage team would access the laboratory through maintenance tunnels and place their explosive charges. The devices were designed with delayed timers that would activate hours after the team's escape, creating the appearance of a secondary explosion caused by the initial contamination incident. The plan required precise timing and coordination between multiple elements. Maria had to trigger the alarm at exactly the right moment, the sabotage team had to complete their work within the evacuation window, and all participants had to maintain their cover identities throughout the operation. On the designated day, Maria began her shift with nervous energy that she channeled into exceptional attention to her medical duties. Every movement and conversation had to appear completely normal while she monitored for the optimal moment to initiate the emergency scenario. The opportunity came during the afternoon shift change when laboratory personnel were transitional and security patrols were adjusting to new schedules. Maria accessed a chemical storage area adjacent to the synthesis laboratory and activated the contamination detection system using emergency procedures she had memorized during her training. Alarms blared throughout the facility as automated systems activated emergency protocols. Laboratory personnel evacuated through designated routes while emergency response teams prepared to assess the contamination threat. The chaos created exactly the distraction the sabotage team needed. Maria joined the evacuation, using her medical training to assist with personnel accountability while secretly monitoring the sabotage team's progress. Engineer Weber and his operatives moved through maintenance corridors toward the laboratory level, carrying their explosive charges disguised as emergency detection equipment. The evacuation proceeded with Germanic efficiency, but the confusion of emergency procedures provided gaps in surveillance that trained operatives could exploit. Security cameras focused on evacuation routes while maintenance areas received less attention during the crisis response. In the laboratory level, the sabotage team worked with practiced precision to place explosive charges at critical points throughout the chemical synthesis equipment. The devices were designed to create maximum damage while leaving forensic evidence suggesting industrial accident rather than deliberate sabotage. Weber planted the primary charge inside the main synthesis reactor, where it would appear to be a pressure vessel failure triggered by the simulated contamination event. Secondary charges were placed in chemical storage areas and ventilation systems to ensure complete destruction of the weapons program's infrastructure. The team completed their work within 18 minutes, well within the window provided by the evacuation procedures. They escaped through the same maintenance corridors used for entry, emerging in different areas of the facility to avoid suspicion from their simultaneous absence. Maria remained with the evacuation group until emergency response teams declared the contamination alert to be a false alarm. Her explanation of detecting unusual odors near chemical storage areas provided a credible reason for triggering the alarm system. German investigators found no evidence of actual contamination, attributing the incident to equipment malfunction. As normal operations resumed, Maria returned to her medical duties while secretly counting down the hours until the explosive charges activated. The devices were set to detonate during the night shift when minimal personnel would be present in the laboratory areas. The explosion occurred at 2:47 a.m., creating a series of blasts that shook the entire facility. The primary charge destroyed the synthesis reactor completely, while secondary explosions eliminated chemical storage tanks and damaged ventilation systems throughout the laboratory level. Emergency response teams rushed to contain fires and chemical leaks caused by the destruction. The blast pattern appeared consistent with an industrial accident triggered by pressure vessel failure, exactly as Engineer Weber had designed. No evidence of sabotage was immediately apparent to German investigators. Maria joined medical staff responding to the emergency, helping treat minor injuries suffered by security personnel during the evacuation. Her genuine shock and concern appeared authentic to observers who had no reason to suspect her involvement in the incident. The chemical weapons laboratory was completely destroyed, along with months of research data and irreplaceable equipment. German estimates suggested that reconstruction would require at least 6 months, effectively eliminating the program's ability to contribute to current military operations. In the days following the explosion, German investigators conducted extensive interviews with facility personnel, searching for any evidence of sabotage or security breaches. Maria's consistent record of professional behavior and her participation in emergency response activities diverted suspicion away from her activities. Engineer Weber and his team had already departed the facility under their cover identities, returning to resistance networks throughout occupied Europe. The success of their mission would be replicated at other German weapons facilities, creating a coordinated campaign of sabotage against Nazi scientific programs. Maria received coded confirmation through Dr. Nowak's network that the intelligence she had provided had enabled additional Allied operations against German weapons development. Bombing raids targeted related facilities while commando units sabotaged supply chains supporting the chemical weapons program. The broader impact of her mission extended beyond the immediate destruction of one laboratory. The intelligence gathered during her infiltration revealed the scope of German chemical weapons development, allowing Allied forces to prepare defensive measures and develop countermeasures against these new threats. However, the increased security measures resulting from the explosion made Maria's continued presence at the facility increasingly dangerous. German investigators were expanding their search for evidence of resistance activity, using new techniques to identify possible infiltrators among the medical staff. Dr. Nowak transmitted instructions for Maria's extraction from the facility, recognizing that her mission had achieved its objectives and that further operations would expose her to unacceptable risks. The resistance needed her skills for other operations, but only if she could escape without compromising the networks that had supported her activities. The extraction plan involved Maria requesting transfer to a civilian hospital in the city, citing personal reasons that would not arouse suspicion. Her excellent performance record and apparent dedication to medical service provided credible justification for accommodating such a request. Oberfeldarzt Klein approved her transfer without extensive investigation, viewing her request as reasonable given the facility's recent security problems. The explosion and ongoing investigation had created stress throughout the medical staff, making personnel requests appear routine rather than suspicious. Maria's final day at the facility passed without incident. She completed her duties with the same professional attention that had characterized her entire assignment, maintaining her cover identity until the moment she walked through the main gate for the last time. The civilian hospital position provided temporary cover while resistance networks arranged her movement to safer locations. Within a week, she had been relocated to a resistance safe house in the countryside, where she could rest and prepare for future assignments. The success of Operation Thunder's sabotage marked a turning point in Maria's war against the Nazi occupation. Her transformation from pharmacy assistant to skilled operative had demonstrated the potential for ordinary citizens to strike meaningful blows against seemingly invincible enemies. The chemical weapons program never recovered from the destruction she helped orchestrate. German resources were redirected to other projects while Allied intelligence continued monitoring for renewed weapons development. The threat that might have killed thousands of civilians had been eliminated through the courage of a young woman who refused to accept defeat. Maria's story became legend within the resistance networks operating throughout occupied Europe. Her techniques were studied and replicated by other operatives, while her example inspired countless others to take up arms against oppression. After the war ended, Maria returned to Warsaw to help rebuild her shattered city. The skills she had learned during her time behind enemy lines proved valuable in peacetime reconstruction efforts, while her experience provided wisdom for dealing with new challenges facing liberated Poland. She never spoke publicly about her wartime activities, understanding that some stories were best left untold. But those who knew her recognized the strength that came from surviving impossible circumstances and striking back against evil in ways that no one had expected. The pharmacy where she had worked with Dr. Nowak was rebuilt, becoming a symbol of resilience in a city that had endured unimaginable suffering. Maria returned to medical work, using her training to heal rather than deceive, but carrying forever the knowledge that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when justice demanded action. The weapons facility was never rebuilt, its ruins serving as a monument to the power of resistance against tyranny. Maria's mission had proven that even the most secure enemy installations could be penetrated and destroyed by those willing to risk everything for freedom. Her legacy lived on in the techniques she pioneered and the networks she helped establish. The quiet young woman who had walked past bombed-out buildings in occupied Warsaw had become something the Nazis never anticipated, a force of liberation operating in the heart of their empire, fighting back in ways that changed the course of history. Threadbare coat tied her as she walked past the rubble where the Goldstein family's bakery once stood. The Germans had destroyed it 3 months ago, along with most of the Jewish quarter. She forced herself to look straight ahead, knowing that showing emotion in public could mean death. But, inside, her heart burned with a rage that grew stronger each day. The pharmacy where she worked as a nurse's assistant sat on the corner of a street that had once bustled with life. Now, only German soldiers and their collaborators moved freely through the area. Dr. Henrik Nowak, the elderly pharmacist who employed her, greeted her with the same cautious nod he gave every morning. They had learned to communicate without words, understanding that walls had ears and neighbors could not always be trusted. "The inventory needs checking today," Dr. Nowak said quietly, his weathered hands sorting through bottles of medicine. Maria understood. This meant they had received another coded message from the resistance network operating throughout the city. Maria had joined the underground movement 6 months earlier, after witnessing German soldiers drag her neighbor's teenage son from his home. The boy's crime had been nothing more than being caught after curfew. She never saw him again. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. Her role in the resistance began small. She carried messages hidden in her medical supplies, moving between safe houses and gathering information about German troop movements. The Nazis never suspected that the quiet young woman treating their wounded soldiers was memorizing details about their operations. Dr. Nowak led her to the back room where they kept the medical supplies. Behind a false wall, hidden compartments contained more than just extra bandages and medicines. Radio equipment, forged identification papers, and coded messages filled the secret space. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she retrieved the latest communication from London. The message contained instructions for her most dangerous mission yet. British intelligence needed detailed information about a new German weapons facility being constructed on the outskirts of Warsaw. The facility was heavily guarded and surrounded by minefields, making traditional reconnaissance nearly impossible. But Maria had an advantage that male resistance fighters lacked. The German Medical Corps had begun recruiting local women to work as nurses in their field hospitals. Her medical training and ability to speak basic German made her an ideal candidate for infiltration. "Are you certain about this?" Dr. Nowak asked, his voice heavy with concern. "If they discover your true purpose, there will be no rescue possible." Maria folded the message and tucked it into her pocket. She had watched friends and neighbors disappear into the night, never to return. She had seen families torn apart and communities destroyed. The time for careful steps had passed. "I'm certain," she replied, meeting his worried gaze. "Someone has to do this." The application process took 3 weeks. Maria submitted her credentials to the German Medical Command, underwent interviews, and endured background checks that made her stomach churn with anxiety. Each day, she expected soldiers to burst through her door. Each night, she rehearsed the cover story that might save her life. When the acceptance letter arrived, Dr. Nowak helped her prepare for the assignment. They created a new identity complete with forged documents and a carefully constructed personal history. Maria Kowalski, the pharmacy assistant, would disappear. In her place would be Anna Mueller, a German-Polish nurse eager to serve the Reich. The transformation required more than just new papers. Maria spent hours practicing her German accent, studying medical procedures used in German hospitals, and memorizing details about her fictional childhood in occupied Silesia. She cut her long brown hair shorter and dyed it a lighter shade that better matched her new identity. On her last evening as herself, Maria sat in her small apartment writing letters she hoped would never need to be delivered. One to her parents in the countryside, another to her sister who had fled to London before the war began. She told them she loved them and asked them to remember her as she truly was, not as the person circumstances had forced her to become. The German medical facility stood behind high walls topped with razor wire. Guard towers overlooked every approach, and machine gun nests protected the main entrance. As Maria approached the gates for the first time, her hands sweated despite the cool October air. The guard who checked her papers barely glanced at her face before waving her through. Inside the compound, she found herself in a world that operated according to German military precision. Everything was organized, labeled, and controlled. Nurses moved through corridors with practiced efficiency, their white uniforms starched and spotless. Maria's supervisor, Oberfeldarzt Klein, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who explained her duties with mechanical precision. She would work in the surgical ward, assisting with operations on wounded German soldiers. Her shifts would begin at dawn and end at sunset, 6 days each week. What Klein did not mention, and what Maria discovered during her first week, was that the medical facility served as more than just a hospital. Underground levels housed laboratories where German scientists conducted experiments that had nothing to do with healing wounded soldiers. Late one evening, while cleaning surgical instruments, Maria overheard two doctors discussing a project called Operation Thunder. They spoke in hushed tones about new explosives being tested in the facility's lower levels. The weapons were designed to cause maximum destruction with minimal materials, perfect for the resource-starved German war machine. Maria's pulse quickened as she realized the significance of this information. If the resistance could learn the details of this weapons program, they might be able to sabotage it or provide crucial intelligence to the Allied forces. But gathering information would require access to areas far beyond her assigned duties. The lower levels were restricted to senior personnel with special clearances. Security cameras monitored every corridor, and guards checked identification at multiple checkpoints. Maria began studying the facility's routines and security measures. She noted which doctors had access to restricted areas, when guard shifts changed, and how supplies moved between different levels of the building. She memorized the faces of personnel who worked in sensitive areas and learned their daily schedules. 3 weeks into her assignment, opportunity presented itself in an unexpected form. Dr. Fischer, one of the senior researchers, collapsed during surgery from what appeared to be a heart attack. The medical emergency created chaos in the normally orderly facility. While other staff members focused on treating Dr. Fischer, Maria slipped away from the surgical ward. She had memorized the location of his office from studying building plans hidden in the Resistance's files. If the weapons project documentation existed, it would likely be found there. The corridors on the restricted level were dimmer than those in the medical sections. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air carried the smell of chemicals and something else she could not identify. Maria's footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as she searched for Dr. Fischer's office. When she found the door, her hands shook as she worked the lock picks Dr. Nowak had taught her to use. The skill had seemed abstract during their practice sessions in the pharmacy's back room. Now, with discovery meaning certain death, every sound seemed amplified. Inside the office, filing cabinets lined the walls and technical diagrams covered a large desk. Maria photographed documents with a tiny camera concealed in her medical bag, working quickly while listening for approaching footsteps. The papers revealed details about explosive compounds, detonation mechanisms, and production timelines that would prove invaluable to Allied intelligence. As she prepared to leave, voices echoed from the corridor outside. German officers were conducting a security sweep following Dr. Fischer's medical emergency. Maria had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached the office door. She quickly returned the documents to their original positions and looked for an alternative exit. A ventilation grate near the ceiling caught her attention. Years of rationing had left her thin enough to fit through the narrow opening. Maria climbed onto Dr. Fischer's desk and removed the grate cover just as footsteps stopped outside the door. She pulled herself into the ventilation shaft and replaced the cover from inside, praying that her absence from the surgical ward had not yet been noticed. The shaft was barely large enough for her body, and dust filled her lungs as she crawled through the darkness. She followed the path that led back toward the medical levels, guided by thin streams of light from grates along the way. When she finally emerged in a supply closet near the surgical ward, her uniform was dirty and her hands were scraped from the metal edges of the ventilation system. She cleaned herself quickly and returned to her duties, hoping that the chaos surrounding Dr. Fischer's condition would explain any inconsistencies in her whereabouts. The photographs she had taken contained enough information to potentially cripple the German weapons program. But transmitting this intelligence to London would require reaching her resistance contacts without arousing suspicion. The medical facility was isolated from the city, surrounded by checkpoints that carefully monitored all personnel entering or leaving. Maria realized that her mission was far from over. Getting inside the facility had been only the beginning. Now she had to find a way to get the vital information out, all while maintaining her cover as a loyal German nurse. As she worked through the remainder of her shift, cleaning surgical instruments and preparing supplies for the next day's operations, Maria's mind raced with plans and possibilities. She had learned to see opportunity in the smallest details, to find weakness in seemingly impenetrable security. The weapon facility's greatest strength, its isolation and strict security, might also prove to be its weakness. The very measures designed to keep secrets in could potentially be turned against the facility itself. But first, she had to survive long enough to put her plans into action. Every moment inside the compound brought new risks and fresh dangers. The photographs hidden in her medical bag felt like they were burning through the leather, a constant reminder of the thin line between success and catastrophe. The next morning brought new challenges as increased security measures swept through the facility. Dr. Fischer had died during the night, and German intelligence officers arrived to investigate whether his death had been natural or the result of sabotage. Maria watched from the surgical ward as investigators questioned staff members and examined security logs. Their presence added new layers of danger to her mission, but it also created opportunities that a careful observer could exploit. The hunt for intelligence had become a deadly game of patience and precision. Maria understood that her next moves would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the outcome of the resistance's efforts throughout occupied Poland.